Everyone, this is the general overview video of the 25-26 returning student room selection process. In this video, I will be covering a number of different topics, including how to determine your room selection number and thus when you will choose your room, the difference between same gender and gender inclusive housing and how that will impact your roommate group and your room selection process, and how to navigate through the room selection process and choose your room for the next academic year. So to start things off, I'm going to talk about how you determine your room selection number. So room selection numbers are only assigned to students who have completed the two-step application process to become eligible to participate in room selection. So those two steps include submitting the 25-26 returning student housing application by the deadline, which is November 22nd at 11:59 p.m. The second step to that is to complete or pay the $75 returning student housing deposit over on campus by the deadline, November 22nd at 11:59 p.m. Only students who have completed both those steps by November 22nd at 11:59 p.m. are eligible and will receive a room selection number. The room selection number will be emailed to students through their UW Eau Claire student email account on Tuesday, November 26th. Within that email, it will show what your room selection number is, as well as a corresponding schedule that shows when your room selection number, or what date and time your room selection number corresponds to essentially the first date and time you are able to actually go in and choose your room. So as I mentioned, that will come as an email, but this information is also available on the housing portal. So to see this information on the housing portal, which this information will not be available and live until November 26th, you will go into the Submit and Manage Your Applications tile on the main landing page of your housing portal. And then you will select your Manage 25-26 contract. If you scroll down and select room selection number, that will bring you into this page. You can see up top in a big, bold red font is your room selection number. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just using a mock student, and so I have assigned them room selection number 1. Below that gives a little synopsis of what room selection numbers are and how they are assigned to students. So new this year, room selection numbers are assigned based on the number of completed UW Eau Claire credits a student had at the beginning of the fall 2024 semester. So unfortunately, previously earned credits from AP exams you took in high school or previously attended institutions, as well as in-progress credits you are currently taking this fall 24 semester, are not counted towards your room selection number. So that means there's a large population of students, namely new freshman students and new transfer students for this fall, that are starting the fall semester with 0 UWEC earned credits. Those students were given a computer-generated randomized room selection number after all students who do have UWEC earned credits were assigned a number. So if you click into this page and you see this number up here says 0, this possibly indicates one of the following things down here. One is you did not pay the $75 housing deposit in campus. You might have submitted your application, but you failed to make that deposit. This is probably the number one reason students are disqualified from room selection is they didn't make that deposit by the deadline. Which is bullet point number 2. So the student did submit their application, but they didn't pay the $75 housing deposit by November 22nd. So unfortunately, we are not able to accept late deposits. And so then if you pay after the 27th or the 22nd at 11:59 p.m., unfortunately, you are disqualified from this round of room selection, and you will need to wait until the March room selection process. Every year we have some students who pay the deposit, but then they fail to actually submit the application on the housing portal prior to November 22nd. And the last reason that you might have received a 0 is you have an approved residency exemption request on file for 25-26. When students complete the residency exemption form, you do sign an acknowledgement saying that If your exemption request is approved and you are approved to seek off-campus accommodations, and then you end up submitting a 25-26 on-campus housing application, that makes you ineligible to participate in both December and March room selection processes. So if any of those are applicable to you and you receive a 0, that is why. So this is what that schedule will look like. As a reminder, this is just a mock-up. In fact, this is just last year's information. So room selection this year will take place from December 2nd to December 6th. I just haven't yet updated the schedule. But essentially, that's what this schedule will look like. So let's say, like I said, this mock person, they received a room selection number of 1, which means you will find your room selection number, or I guess the range that your room selection number falls into, and that will correspond with a start date and a start time. This is the date and time that you are actually able to go into the room selection process to begin choosing your room. If you try to enter into the room selection process before your number or your start date and time, it will give you an error message and you will not be able to proceed. So I am room selection number 1, so that means my start and date and time last year, I guess, would be December 4th at 8:30 in the morning. So I just wanted to show this to you to get an idea of what that will look like. As I said, this schedule will also be included in the room selection notification email you'll receive on November 26th if you have completed both steps and are eligible for a room selection number. So for the sake of this tutorial, let's pretend that I am in a roommate group, and my roommate has lottery number 550. So we can see that I obviously choose my housing before my roommate does, and I think an important thing to mention is this is just the beginning, the very earliest you are able to enter into the process and choose your room. You certainly can enter into the process after your start date and time. However, I always recommend that you go in right at your start date and time, just because that will provide you with the most availability. Just because if I do wait until 12 p.m. on December 4th, just know that there will be several students entering into the process before I go and choose my room, and they might take some rooms before I have the opportunity to select. So just know that the longer you wait, the less availability and variety you may have to choose from. So that is what essentially what will be included within the room selection email. So next, I kind of want to transition into talking about how to pick your room and what that will really look like. So when it is your time to begin room selection, you will navigate to the Room and Meal Plan Bookings tile, and you will scroll until you find the room selection button. As I mentioned, if you try and click this button prior to your start date and time, you will receive an error message and it won't let you into the process. So just wait until your start date and time begins before clicking this button. Additionally, if you are in a roommate group, it is always encouraged that the student with the lowest room selection number will actually be the one to pick the room and then pull in any other roommates. So when it comes to actually choosing the room, leader member status doesn't necessarily matter. The member of the roommate group could have a lower number than the leader. Leader member status is just used to determine if your roommate group is mutual and valid. So really, leader member status has nothing to do with it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the leader of the roommate group that picks the room and pulls the member in. It could definitely be vice versa, where the member chooses the room and then the leader gets pulled in by the member. So when you click that room selection button, this is the page that it will take you to. You will be able to see up top that this is a 9-month contract. So this is based on the contract length preference I had indicated within my housing application. Students who indicate they want a 12-month contract, it will say 12-month contract up there. You are also able to see what or how you answered the housing type question within your housing application. So I indicated within my application that I am seeking gender inclusive living within the apartments or suites. And then that, if you look at same gender housing versus gender inclusive, that will kind of break down for you what availability you should be seeing when you go into the room selection process. So since I indicated I'm looking for gender inclusive living in the apartments or suites, I should be able to see stuff in Chancellor's, Suites, and Haymarket. There are a few different other gender inclusive options, such as I'm seeking gender inclusive living in the Suites Rainbow Pod. And then there's a third option that's I'm seeking gender inclusive housing on the Towers Rainbow Floors or the Oak Ridge Rainbow Pod. So when you enter or click that room selection button, you'll see a few different options down below. Obviously, if I said I'm seeking gender inclusive housing, I will want to make sure I'm selecting the gender inclusive button to begin my room selection process. If I select same gender, it's going to give me an error code telling me, hey, you have gender inclusive housing preference selected, therefore you need to exit out and click gender inclusive. It also gives me the opportunity to update my contract, any of my contract preferences, or to manage my roommate group right during room selection. So I'm just going to click Update Contract so I can show you what that looks like. I do have a gentle reminder here that if you are in a roommate group, you need to make sure all members of the group have the exact same answers for all three of these questions. So I can see I am seeking a 9-month contract. I'm seeking gender inclusive housing in the apartments or suites, and I have indicated no to an international student roommate. So if I cancel this and go back to the room selection process, I'm going to click the Manage Roommate Group button just so I can show you what that looks like. So admittedly, this is kind of a wordy page, but just pay close attention. It kind of goes, it talks about some guidelines, leader member status, how you can only be part of one roommate group at a time, any kind of roommate group requirements, and that just kind of reiterates on the second page here, and then how to create a roommate group, etc. When you scroll all the way down, you'll be able to see your roommate group if applicable. So we can see here that I, Housing Office, am in a 3-person roommate group with Housing 70 and Housing 71. And we are all leader or member status, therefore my roommate group is complete and valid. If anyone's status is invited, just know that the student has not accepted or declined the roommate invitation. Therefore, when you go and choose housing, that student who is still in invited status will not be able to be pulled into the room. So I always advise students to just double check their roommate groups before starting room selection, because after you select a room, if someone hadn't accepted the roommate invitation until after you're done booking the room, then you would have booked the room without them. So we don't want that. Don't let that be you. Make sure that everyone is either a leader or member status before you begin your room selection process. So I want to take a moment and kind of talk about the differences between same gender and gender inclusive housing, because there are a few nuances with that. So with gender inclusive housing, specifically if you have indicated you're seeking gender inclusive living in the apartments or suites, there is a fill requirement for those spaces, meaning that you and your roommate group must fill all beds in a unit to be able to select it during room selection. So if you're seeking gender inclusive living in the apartments or suites, as I mentioned before, you will be able to see Chancellor's Hall apartments, Haymarket Landing apartments, and the suites units. Since there are fill requirements in this space, if this is what you indicated within your application, like I said, there are a few nuances. Chancellors and suites, those units across the board, every single unit is comprised of 4 different bed spaces, meaning your roommate group needs to be at least 4 people in order to be able to select any of those preferences. In Haymarket Landing, we do have a few 2-person gender inclusive units and 4-person gender inclusive units. There are no units in Haymarket Landing built out for only 3 people. So, and then with same gender housing, meaning that is housing based on the gender binary, all male or all female, there is no fill requirement. So if you are in a 3-person roommate group, you will be able to self-select a 4-bedroom chancellor's apartment, for example, and then that 1 bed space that you did not fill will be filled by another student, perhaps someone who is not in a roommate group might self-select that space, or after the room selection process concludes, the housing office might manually assign a student there who failed to self-select, or later on in the year you might receive a roommate. So like I said, gender inclusive housing is what I'm looking for, so I'm going to click the gender inclusive button to begin my room selection process. So as I can see here, this process is outlining that I will be looking for a Haymarket Chancellors or Suites unit. This is just telling me that I am booking my room for the 25-26 school year, and then it has the start and end dates of those terms. This pop-up is just saying, stop, this is all gender or gender inclusive housing. Make sure that you're in the right form, and if you're unsure, read the next page thoroughly. So I'm going to click OK to proceed. This is a very important page for students who are seeking gender inclusive housing. Just to re-emphasize these points, this was within your housing application, so you should have read that when you filled out the housing application, but just reiterating it here, that with gender inclusive housing, since there is a fill requirement, if at any point during the 25-26 academic year, or maybe even the summer prior to, if you had a roommate who canceled their application or received a room change, leaving a vacancy within the unit, it is the collective effort of all residents or remaining residents in the room to find a replacement student to keep the unit same gender. Otherwise, housing reserves the right to relocate whoever they need to flip the unit to same gender. So just make sure you read that thoroughly and understand that. So this is the roommate group page. So this is where you will see your roommates listed if you are in a roommate group. Again, it's just saying make sure your leader member status, make sure that all roommates have selected the 9-month contract, have qualified for room selection, and they're all saying I'm seeking gender inclusive housing in the apartments or suites. So as I mentioned before, we need to make sure everyone in your roommate group has all the same preferences listed. So you might be thinking, that's funny. I just saw that this housing office student was in a 3-person roommate group. However, we can only see 1 person listed here. That is a pretty good indicator that something within this right here is wonky. So before proceeding through room selection, because I don't want to leave my other person in my roommate group in the dust, we want to make sure to text the roommate or whoever, if you're not physically with them during the time you're choosing your housing, to figure out what could be the problem, why they are not showing here. I can see how someone is here, but not everybody. So I'm going to quickly cancel this. Oops. And then bear with me. I'm actually going to bring up the student's account who is not showing up so I can show you what that looks like. So we're missing our good old friend Housing 71 from our roommate group. So, I think this is important to note that if whoever is choosing the room, if you have a different start date and time, your friend, whoever needs to update their contract preferences, should not go through the room selection button. Like I said, if it's not their start date and time yet, it will give them an error message. Instead, they should go to the Submit and Manage Application button, and then there will be an Update Contract button, and that is where they can flip their preferences. So they can't go to the room selection button, but they should go through their application to change those preferences. For the sake of time in this tutorial, I'm just going to do a good old shortcut. So I'm going to update my contract here, and this is where I can see that this contract length is where that discrepancy is, because I can see that, okay, yep, I am seeking gender inclusive housing in the apartments or suites, but I have indicated I'd like a 12-month contract, where my other 2 roommates said a 9-month contract. So I'm just going to quickly flip that. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back into the room selection process with my original student. I'm going to text my roommate saying, yep, I changed my preferences. I am all good to go. And now my roommate should be able to proceed through the room selection process. I'm going to click gender inclusive because that's the type of housing I'm looking for. I have already read through all of this, and now we can see both of my roommates are listed here. So I'm good to go. My roommate group looks good. I'm going to proceed. The instructions up top just shows you the different ways or different instructions on how to search for rooms. So whether you're selecting a room for yourself only or selecting with roommate groups. And I scroll down and I'm not able to see any rooms. I'm getting this message that says there are no rooms available for me in this process. And then why I might be getting this message. One, it could be possible that all 9-month gender inclusive Chancellor's, Haymarket, and Suites units have been selected. Or two, you and your roommate group may not meet the fill requirement to select these spaces. So as I mentioned before, Chancellors and Suites, you can only select those gender inclusive units if you are in at least a 4-person roommate group. And then in Haymarket, we have options for 2 people and for 4 people, but unfortunately none for 3. However, in Aspenson Mogensen Hall, we do have a few 3-person gender inclusive units. So if that sounds like it could work for us and we want to seek those out, we will need to cancel and update our contract and flip our contract length to 12 months because Aspenson Mogensen is a building that has a 12-month housing contract, and then we can start the process again. Or we can flip our gender inclusive preference to same gender if all of us in the roommate group are the same gender. Or you could update your roommate group and find one other student seeking gender inclusive housing to add to your roommate group. Of course, that person that is invited will need to go out and accept the invitation before you can go back and do your room selection process. So that is just kind of some of those nuances I'm talking about when I talk about same gender versus gender inclusive housing. As I mentioned, if you are in a roommate group where all of you do have the same legal gender, but within your housing application, you're all preferencing gender inclusive housing, it's my advice or my recommendation that you actually put down same gender housing because that will give you more availability and more flexibility, and then there won't be that fill requirement and you might be able to select something that's within your preferences. So that is kind of some of the nuances with same gender versus gender inclusive housing. So I also want to show you what it looks like if you are just doing room selection by yourself as a sole individual. Oops, that's the wrong test person. I'm actually going to do this one. So this student has qualified for room selection, but they are not in a roommate group, which over 50% of our students choose to go through room selection individually. So same process. Click the room and meal plan booking, click the room selection tile, and you will be brought to the room selection landing page. I can see up here that this student in particular is seeking same gender housing. So with same gender housing, you should be able to see residence hall or traditional residence hall doubles and singles. That's like Bridgman and Towers and Sutherland. You should be able to see units in the Suites, Chancellor's, Priory, and Haymarket. Not Aspenson Mogensen, because as a reminder, if you want to see Aspenson Mogensen, you need to ensure that you have a 12-month contract length selected. So if you really want Aspenson Mogensen, click Update Contract and switch your contract to 12 months. But since I'm seeking same gender, I'm going to click the same gender button. The very first page it will take me to looks pretty similar to the other process. So I'm booking for fall and spring of 25 and 26. Again, is the roommate group page. I can see that I do not have a roommate listed, which checks out because I'm not in a roommate group. Again, it gives you some information about the room selection process, how to search for rooms, how to lock your rooms, what double bed spaces mean. So double bed spaces essentially mean it's a bedroom with 2 people in that room. So Haymarket 2-bedroom doubles, it's a 2-bedroom apartment, but 2 students live in each bedroom. That's the same with suites double doubles. So there are 2 different ways to search for rooms. Personally, I find it easiest to use the room type dropdown, and I can select the unit type I am looking for. Otherwise, you can just select the building in general to see all availability within the hall, or you can utilize these drill down arrows if you're really looking for a specific floor or a specific floor area. I think it's important to mention that the numbers you see following the hall names reflect how many available bed spaces remain in the hall for your gender. So in Bridgman Hall, I can see there are 28 bed spaces available. That equals, since Bridgman only has traditional like double rooms, that's 28 bed spaces. So not necessarily 28 completely vacant rooms. That could just mean that essentially means there's 14 available rooms because there's 2 beds in each room. So once like I said, you can kind of use the drill down arrows to find something that works for you. Another thing to mention, if you are going into this without a roommate group, in order to select the room, you will have to utilize this drop down arrow or drill down arrow to the left of the room that you are interested in to be able to lock the room. So I can see that there is a student listed, or a student has already self-selected one half of this space. If I hover over their name and click on it, I'll be able to see some information about them, such as their contact information and how they answered that roommate questionnaire when they submitted their housing application. And I can see, following the room number, how many available bed spaces are still left within that unit. So I can see there are a number of vacant doubles. I can see that there are a few Towers North singles available, but I really highly encourage students, if you're looking for a standard double room, to put the power in your own hands and look at who is in the other half of the room, look at how they answered those questions to see if they might be a compatible roommate with you. Because if you go and select an open double, you're kind of taking a chance on who your roommate will be, because there will be students entering into the room selection process after you select your room, and then they could self-select the other half of that bed space. So I personally recommend students kind of see who is already out there in one half of the room and choose a roommate who they think will be compatible with them. So for the sake of this, I'm going to say, yep, Housing 72, they sound like we will get along just fine. In order to lock the room, if you are not in a roommate group, utilize this drill down arrow into the left of the room or the bed space. So Towers North 1072 bed space B, you will see this little lock icon. If you are in a roommate group, over here on the right, you will see a button that says lock for my roommate group or lock for my group. That is what you are going to want to click. But since I do not have a roommate group, I am going to click the little lock icon. I can then see that a 10-minute countdown timer has begun. That essentially gives me 10 minutes to go through the very end of this room selection process and actually book my room for myself. While this room is locked, it is held out of inventory from any other students who might be currently in the room selection process looking for rooms, so they're not able to take the room from me. In the event you want to continue browsing rooms more, that's totally cool. You can release the lock to go back to the previous screen to see what rooms are still available. Just know, if you release the lock, it will instantly put that room back out available for other students to lock. So if you decide, oh, just kidding, I really like Towers North 1072B, that could already be locked by another student by the time you return to it. So just something to consider as you're entering into the room selection process. Also, if you are in a roommate group, you will see more than one drop down right here. That is where the act of actually pulling in the roommate comes into play. So you will assign yourself to one side of the room, and then on the other drop down, you will pull in your other roommates, however many you have. Every year, we have students who miss this step, pulling in the roommate. they go through, they book themselves into the room, and they fail to pull in your roommate. Then another student might come in and self-select the other beds within the unit. So again, don't let that be you. Be very careful when it comes to this page and make sure that everybody is being pulled in if you are in a roommate group. So I clicked next, and essentially there's just a pop-up that says make sure this is the room type you want based on the current availability, as this will be your assignment for the 25-26 school year. We do have a formal room change process that will open at the beginning of February for students to put their names on the wait list for a different assignment. But for now, I'm happy with this choice, so I'm going to click OK. My countdown timer continues to decrease as we show you information about the cancellation policy. Make sure that you are familiar with what the cancellation policy is. There, we do have it linked right here if you want to learn more, and then click next. Again, every year we get some students who get to this page and they're like, okay, I have my room secured, I'm done, and then they exit their browser. Well, the countdown timer will continue to count down, and if you do not click book your room, then after 10 minutes, the lock will expire, the room will go out, and then you hadn't actually selected a room for you or for yourself and roommate group if that's applicable. So again, make sure you continue on to the very end and click book your room to make sure that you actually get that room secured. So I have booked my room. I will receive an email that says, congratulations, this is the room that you chose for next year. You can see what your contract length is, what your assignment is, and what your roommates, who your roommates are. So like I said, there was already a student in one half of the room, so it'll show me who my roommate is. If you are in a roommate group and you are the one that is choosing housing and then pulling all your roommates in, not only will you receive a confirmation email, but all of your roommates will also receive a confirmation email saying, hey, your roommate selected this room for you. Here are all your roommates. They can also see that information listed in their housing portal under room and roommate information. And if you are pulled into a room by a roommate, then you can totally disregard your room selection number and your room selection date and time because you already have a booking. So if you do have room selection number 550 and your roommate who has room selection number 1 pulls you into the room and you receive that confirmation email, when your start date and time comes up and you try entering into the room selection process, it's not going to let you in. It's going to give you an error message and it's going to say, hey, you already have a room, so you can't reselect. So just something to consider. So that is pretty much the entirety of the 25-26 returning student room selection process. As a reminder, in this video we covered how to determine your room selection number and how that corresponds to when you are first eligible to go into the portal and pick your room. The difference between same gender and gender inclusive housing, and some of the nuances with what availability you will be able to see and how that impacts roommate groups, and then how to navigate throughout the room selection process, how to search for rooms, how to lock rooms, how to pull in the roommate. That is all some information we covered. So after you watch this video tutorial, if you have further questions, definitely feel free to contact our office at housing@uwec.edu, or you may call us at 715-836-3674. Our office is open Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and we will be available during room selection week. If you run into some issues, we would be more than happy to troubleshoot with you.